Welcome, everybody. This is Mary Applegate, CEO of TeachToTheBrain.com and host of the Brain Academy, where we provide personal and professional development with the brain in mind. You'll receive webinars, seminars, teleseminars, live trainings, books, ebooks, newsletters, audio, video, and more. I'd also like to introduce the Brain Responsive Approach, which I am co-author of with John Applegate. This is located online at teachtothebrain.com as an online course, as well as thebrainacademy.com. The Brain Responsive Approach is a 5-week online course for personal and professional development with your brain in mind. It provides an approach to learning and teaching, considering the most effective strategies that help you be responsive in your learning and your teaching. Today we're going to talk about your brain and how it processes information. It's brought to you by me at thebrainacademy.com. And for showing up and listening to this, we gave you a little bonus today. It's an all-level brain ebook that you'll find located below this video and available with a specific download of your username and password, or you can get it through your email and signing up with your name and email. Let's start with a quote from Jonah Lehrer from the book Imagine How Creativity Works. Jonah writes, "Your brain takes in your world like a huge flood of data and acts like an irrigation system." Now, Robert Ornstein and Richard Thomas in The Amazing Brain write, "There are probably more differences in human brains than in any other animal, partly because the human brain does most of its developing in the outside world." And what they're implying here is that our experiences outside of ourselves are what help develop our brain. Now, the human brain is an amazing structure, a universe of infinite possibilities and mystery. It constantly shapes and reshapes itself as a result of experience, yet it can take off on its own without input from the outside world. A quote from David Sosa's book, How the Brain Learns. It's in the book today that we are going to analyze chapter 2 of. Now, he also writes, although the brain remains largely a mystery beyond its own understanding, we are slowly uncovering more about its baffling processes. And what he's implying here is what has developed through technology. It's called a PET scan. PET stands for positron emission tomography. And this kind of scan is available for the body, and doctors use it to help analyze where organs are going wrong. And they insert it's called a reader in the body, and it lights up as our organs function and work, and it tells us where it's going right or wrong. Now, the brain cell metabolism that occur in response to different types of brain work can be presented through PET scans. Now, they do this to help us understand how the brain works when we're learning new words. We can look at the brain and see what happens when we analyze tones in art. They can look at the brain right now as people are doing mathematical calculations and see which part of the brain lights up and is functioning at the time. And they also can help you understand how your brain responds to images, which is the way we learn and think. Now, one thing is clear with PET scans, that the brain calls selected areas into play depending on what the individual is doing at the moment. And in this PET scan, they're actually looking at the brain as it works to perceive different colors. And if you notice on the back end of the brain or the occipital lobe, where it lights up when the eyes work, you can see how perceiving different colors in this image, in this scan, it lights up differently. Now, what I want to teach you about is the model that's presented in David Sosa's book, and it's called Information Processing Model. The scope of this model is a major cerebral operation that deals with collecting, retrieving, storing, and evaluating information. And this is what we're going to teach you today. It is a process that I'm going to teach you that your brain goes through. Now, why is it a process? Well, we talked about this in former trainings. First and foremost, your brain is responsible for your survival. Second, it will attend to your prosperity, your fortune, and your success after assuring you're physically safe. In other words, you thriving is based on your brain's ability to operate a certain way. Now, in David Sosa's book, he has a model that's called the information processing model, and it's your brain's main job is to process information moment to moment, minute to minute, hour to hour, 24/7. So, what I'm going to teach you is a modern dynamic model of how your brain deals with information from the senses. We're also going to teach about behavior of the two temporary memories, immediate and working memory, and that's what makes up your short-term memory. And then we're going to talk about the criteria for long-term memory and storage, of how you store memory and learn new things. And then, of course, the most important part of this model is how self-concept impacts your learning. Now, in the book, How the Brain Learns, in Chapter 2, David Sosa presents a model, and it looks like this. Now, this model is very simple. Its simplicity is to help you understand the clarity of how we process information now, but there are limits to this model. Now, although the explanation of the model will follow items going through the processing system, it's really important to note that this linear approach, again, is used solely for simplicity and clarity. Your brain does not work in a linear manner. What the evidence shows and supports right now with the research of how the brain learns, memory supports a model of actual parallel processing, and many items process quickly and simultaneously with limits, taking different paths through and out of the system. So this is electrical, chemical events happening within the brain. It doesn't go linear. So that's the one thing I want to clarify. But we're going to teach you about your own thinking and how you process this information based on a linear, simple linear model. Now remember, your experience affects your brain, and your brain's chemistry and electricity is a biological process. So that's one thing we want to remember. This is biology, and we're just doing some simple teaching here with what happens when you process information and learn new things. So here we have a brain taking in millions and millions of bits of data and information to determine things like whether or not it's cold and you need to put on a coat or you need a hat on. You're going to be thinking and learning about new things as maybe a siren goes by. So what I'm talking about right now is how your brain is taking in information in the senses, and it's millions and millions of bits of information on second to second basis. So what we're helping you understand is the model starts with the environment and your senses. So here I have the model, and I'm pointing to your senses. And when you bring in information from the senses, your brain is going to filter it. And that filter is made up of what's called the sensory registry. Now, as we get into the coursework in the brain responsive approach, we will teach you about the actual brain parts and the thalamus and the reticular activating system called the RAS. But those two parts in your brain, the reticular activating system, which is located in the brainstem, and the thalamus, which is located in the limbic system deep down inside your brain, those two parts make up what's called the sensory registry. And it's this registry that filters all of that information from the senses. So the sensory registry in the model uses the individual's past experiences to determine the data's degree of importance. And we're talking about learning new information. So as I show you this slide, this system, which is also referred to as a sensory registry, is drawn in the model as a side view of Venetian blind slats. Like the blinds, a sensory register filters incoming information to determine how important it is. So So as I look at this model again, you can see the sensory registry will throw out the information if it's not important, or it'll move it to what they call immediate memory. If immediate memory doesn't want to register it as meaningful and make sense, it will throw it out, or if it's not important. Now, let's talk about those two memories, immediate memory and working memory. Here, I have a little graph that shows you short-term memory is actually now defined with two different memories, immediate memory and working memory. So let's talk about something new that you learn. It moves into your short-term memory, not something that you know already, and your brain is going to filter it based on if it's meaning and makes sense to you, if it's meaningful and makes sense. It moves it on to immediate memory. So as you're learning something new, it's now in your immediate memory, and now it's going to decide if that's worth moving on to your working memory. Now your working memory in the graph is shown as a table, and that is very important to keep in mind because the sense and meaning is real critical as you work through this in your brain. And remember, we're not talking about a table inside your brain. We're talking about how you work and process information. And the table is really a good way to show that you might put it in there for a while and work with it. So let's go back to immediate memory. This is a place where we put information briefly before we make a decision on how to dispose of it. Now, if you remember, your brain is really there to help you survive. So if it's keeping you safe and you're surviving, then it's going to move on and thrive. So your immediate memory works with the information that's given, and if you feel safe and you have a surroundings where your body and your mind are calm, then the information is going to move on to working memory. Now, I need you to note something here. You cannot recall information that your brain does not retain. And so it's really, really important to keep that in mind, and we'll go back to that. But if I don't retain information in my brain based on sense and meaning and moving it to working memory, I could never recall it. So those teachers out there or parents, it's really important to try to wrap your brain around this information. What you're trying to teach your children or teach your learners, even if they're adults, it has to go through immediate and working memory to move on to long-term memory. Now here's some examples of immediate memory at work. Let's say you have new shoes on, and those new shoes feel snug. So when you put them on, the receptors in your skin actually send pain impulses to the sensory registry. Now after a while, however, as you get involved with your work, you notice the discomfort signals kind of go away. They're not there anymore. Well, your sensory registry is now blocking the impulses from reaching your consciousness because you're involved, you're safe, even though you're not hurting to where you can't walk. Those sensory registry filters out that and says, don't worry about that, okay? You don't have to worry about your tight shoes. You're safe. Just one example of immediate memory. Now here's an example of immediate memory at work. Often happens in classrooms throughout schools. Sirens are heard and then go away. So your immediate memory, you're working, you're doing your tasks, you hear sirens, and all of a sudden they come close, you attend to it in your memory and your physical being, you actually turn and look and think, are those coming close? And then they go away, and your immediate memory filters it out, and you stay on task to whatever is going on. But the sirens are heard now, and they get closer and closer and closer, and your immediate memory's not filtering that, and they stop, and you hear them very close to the window or to the building you're in, or if you're outside, you hear them pull close to you. Your immediate memory is now attending to that. It's filtering it and asking you to attend to it. And there's no way you can go on with the task of teaching math or learning language when you have a siren outside the door. So there's an example of your brain keeping you alive or letting you thrive. Now, threats and emotion affect memory processing. So this is a critical step to understand. If you are a learner and you're under threat or your emotions are out of control, it's going to be very, very hard for you to process and learn and remember things. If you are physically hurt, like the little character in this picture with crutches, it's going to be very hard for you to concentrate and learn new things as your body's trying to heal. If you smell burning, something burning or something bad, you're not going to be able to attend anything that has new learning, as you have to attend to what your brain will not stop. It will help, it will stop you and go listen to it will stop and go figure out what that bad smell is. And the last example is a threat of a dog, or if you have fear of dogs and a new dog walks into the room, your emotional state of that dog and your experiences from the past are going to affect the next steps in your learning. So it's really important to make sure you have the presence of safety in a new learning environment. Now, data affecting survival and data generating emotions are processed ahead of data for new learning. So we are working with immediate memory. You are going to have information coming into you. If you want to move it on to working memory, you have to have the data not affect your survival or your emotional states and new learning. You have to make sure that you're set up for a safety, and then you'll be able to generate new learning and move it into working memory. So this is really critical for the classroom, really critical for training of new employees, for you learning new things. It's really, really, really the step to moving things into long-term memory. And this is where we miss out a lot. We don't realize that when we present information to people that are trying to learn, we don't realize that it might be affecting their immediate memory, and they can't even go into working memory because they don't feel safe. There's an emotional piece that's happening in the classroom of bullying or threat, or you don't feel safe with the information because you haven't worked with it long enough. So we got to get through immediate memory first to move it into working memory. Now, there are 2 facts that determine processing, and please take a moment to write these down. Number 1, one must feel physically safe and emotionally secure before they can focus on new learning. Physically safe and emotionally secure. So as you're a teacher or a parent or a trainer, you need to make sure that they're physically safe and emotionally secure before you even begin introducing new information. And then number 2, how a person feels about a learning situation determines the amount of attention devoted to it. So it's important to screen and find out where people are in their perception of what you're doing if you are instructing. It's also important for you to understand how you feel about a learning situation before you attend and devote a lot of time to it. And you have to pump yourself up and get yourself set up. And now we're working with the middle part of the model, the working memory and the tabletop. So let's talk about working memory. I helped you understand a little bit about immediate memory, so let's go into working memory. Now, working memory is a model. They use a tabletop because it's a place of limited capacity, just like your tabletop. You can only fit so much on it. In your brain, it's a place where we build, we take apart, and we work ideas for eventual storage someplace else. So think of learning new tasks as an employee. You are going to work and rework some information as you work in your job space, and you're trying to learn. So you're using your memory, you're working with it. Now, when something is in working memory, it generally captures our focus and demands our attention. And that's very obvious when I work with our team and there's something in working memory. Let's talk about a simple thing of marketing with email marketing strategies, and you have a new email software to learn. And when something is in working memory, it captures our attention. So you can be sure that my team is attending to the email marketing software. It captures their attention and it makes them want to learn it. What I have to help them understand is that there's only a capacity of working memory at a certain amount. So I have to start slow and build on what they already know, and a few items at once. is what I'm going to work with them if they've never seen email marketing before and they've never seen that software. We start with the framework and we start with 7 items only. So if you look at the general guidelines of working with memory, excuse me, the capacity of working memory, when you're working with people, there's some general guidelines. If they're younger than 5, 2 items at once. We're trying to teach them new things, their colors. So we're going to talk with little kids under the age of 5, and we're teaching them their colors. We're going to start with the colors of the rainbow, and we're going to have 2 items of each color, but we're only going to introduce red and orange. And we're going to introduce those colors, or red and yellow, because red, when they're mixed, they make that color. I know I didn't say that correctly there, but 5, we're not going to introduce 7 different colors to a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old. We're going to start with 1 or 2. Now, if I get to the ages of 5 to 14, now I'm going to introduce, if we're doing spelling words and I have a 3rd grader, I'm going to introduce 5 words at once. No more than 5, because their working memory has a capacity. Now, as you see the numbers, as we get older, your working memory grows. So if I'm working with someone 14 or older, now I can introduce more items at once, but look, 7 items only. So to give someone who's 17 32 items to learn, we would be much better with their working memory and getting them to success if we chunk that down and make sure that they have 3 different sets of 7. So these are kind of some things that I want you to start understanding. In our online course, the Brain Responsive Approach, will take you into some details of exactly what these areas are and give you more examples. But do know the capacity of working memory is really based on your intellectual age and your chronological age. Now let's do a test. Please follow these directions, and when ready, I want you to stare at the number below for 7 seconds. So as I show this number, please just stare at it for 7 seconds. So, now that I take the number off, can you recall that number? Go ahead and write it down or say it out loud. Is this the number that you recalled? 921-7053. If you were correct with that, what that demonstrates is your functional capacity. In other words, you recalled all the numbers, so your functional capacity is 7, which means that ability to work with 7 items at once and remember it. And if you notice, that's what phone numbers are. Now, in the day and age of 2020, phone numbers aren't as important to remember, but boy, did we have processes back before we had our cell phones of remembering digits in order. And numbers were put in 7 because that's what our functional capacity was capable of. Our phone numbers, we could remember that many numbers. So let's try it again. When ready, I want you to stare at the number below for 7 seconds. Are you ready? Here we go. So that was 7 seconds. Can you recall those numbers? Go ahead and write them down. Did you get those numbers written down correctly? 491-508-2637. Your functional capacity here, in other words, how many numbers did you recall? Probably not. If you're like the normal brain and normal person, you probably recall, let me go back to that slide, you might have recalled all of them, but I bet you used a strategy called chunking. You chunked them down into 3 sets, 3 numbers, 3 numbers, and 4 numbers. That's often how we memorized our Social Security numbers. Now, The lesson for us right here is less is more for your brain. If you keep the number of items in a lesson objective within the capacity limits of your mind, you are more likely to remember more of what you learned. If you chunk it down and take sections and start working with information, you will have more opportunity to move it into what we call long-term storage. Now this slide that I'm showing you is now we're going to move into what we call long-term storage, but there's two arrows that are really, really important: storing information and retrieving information. And if you look on the image, right above storing and retrieving arrows, you see the words sense and meaning. So let me take you through the importance of sense and meaning, making sense of something, and of course the meaning of this chapter. There are some criteria for long-term storage. One of the criteria is the information that has survival value is quickly stored. So if you think about touching a hot stove or stepping in front of a bus, you will never take those steps again if you actually followed through and touched something hot on a stove, because it's about survival in your body and brain, making sure your receptors, your sensory receptors, know how to keep you safe. So you will absolutely filter and store things that are on a survival basis, such as touching a hot stove or stepping in front of a bus. You'll remember those things. Your brain will do that. Now, there's criteria for long-term storage in any learning situation. Working memory connects with the learner's past experiences and asks just 2 questions to determine whether an item is saved or rejected. And this is where we have sense and meaning. Does this information make sense? Can the learner understand the item on the basis of experience? And then the next question, before it moves to long-term memory, is does this have meaning? Is the item relevant to the learner? So these 2 questions are critical for anyone learning new things. Does this make sense? That's the first question you need to understand when you're learning new information. And does it have meaning? If I know the answer to both of those questions, I'm going to want to move it into long-term storage. Now, there's a relationship of sense to meaning. And when learning new things, the box here will show you this. Now, I have on the left is meaning present. It's either very low, moderate to high, or very high in the boxes. And is sense present? It's very low. Does it make sense? Nope, not at all. Kind of. Yes, and very. Yes, this makes a lot of sense. Well, the meaning comes when we get to the very top right corner. If it makes sense and it's meaningful to the person, you have a very, very strong chance of moving it to long-term storage. Now, if I go back to my example of email marketing, I have a person involved on our team that's into email marketing. That's their job. That person needs to know how to run the software, how to respond to those that are opting into our emails, because we're teaching them. So now, to learn about the email software, is there sense? Does it make sense to learn this? Yes, it's very high. It's part of my responsibility. Does it have meaning? Yes, the software goes directly with your job. Now I have a very strong chance of moving how to work with that software into long-term memory and understand it. If I'm a person that's not responsible for the email software on the team, my job is to do social media marketing, so I'm involved in all the social media. Now all of a sudden the sense and meaning doesn't really fit into this chart. It's very low for me. It doesn't make sense for me to understand email marketing. It doesn't make sense because my job is social media. I don't need to know that. It's moderate to high if it works with the social media person and I have to work with that person that's on that software. Is meaning present? This doesn't mean anything to me when it comes to social media as my job. So it's going to be very, very low. And you can see on this chart, now my brain isn't going to move it into long-term storage until the responsibility of both sense and meaning show up. So let me ask you a question. A true or false? I want you to respond. When learning, you perform a new learning task well. You're likely to retain it. Would you answer true or false to that? And go ahead and write that question down and answer it on your paper so we have response to this. Later, I can have you go back and look and reflect. Well, the answer to this question, when learning, this statement, when learning, you perform a new learning task well. You're likely to retain it. The answer is actually false. We cannot presume that because you perform a new learning task well, it will be permanently stored. Sense and or meaning must be present in some degree for long-term storage to occur. So as you're learning new things or you're teaching those that are under your command or your guide, it has to make sense to them and it has to have meaning, or it will not go into long-term storage. And you can reflect on those you train or your own learning. Now, long-term storage on the model is represented in filing cabinets. And the filing cabinets, as you see, have files and their storage. It's just a physical representation of what might happen inside your brain. Now, you don't file things away like this shows, but in this linear model of how you process information, it's a great example of storage. Excuse me. So long-term memory, let's talk about that. Memory is a process, not a fixed thing or singular skill. So when you think about your memories, it's a process your brain goes through. It's not in there and just shows up. It has to go through an actual process of electrical, chemical events. Information needs to make sense to the learner for it to be in long-term memory. We just talked about that on our chart. Information needs to have meaning to the learner. Absolutely, we just talked about it again, those two arrows. The brain constantly seeks pattern to build understanding and connections. And this is critical for all of you to know when you're teaching someone something new or teaching yourself. Find the pattern in the information that associates with something you already know, and your brain's more likely to store it. Patterns are absolutely visible in the organic tissue and the way your neurons connect, and patterning is how your brain remembers things. So patterns. The brain constantly seeks those patterns to build understanding and connections to new information. Okay? Now I have another true and false question statement. You decide if this is true or false. Past experiences always influence new learning. And the key word is always influence your new learning. Do you think that's true or false? Well, you were right if you said true. Past experiences, whether positive or negative, will have an influence how your connection through sense and meaning. If the past experience was both meaningful and made a lot of sense at the time, it will be moved to long-term memory and long-term storage. Now remember, long-term memory and long-term storage are kind of two different things. Long-term memory refers to the process of storing and retrieving information, and long-term storage, as the word says, storage, are areas in the brain where the memories are kept. Now as we look at this model again, let's talk about the triangle over on the right and the long-term storage. And what I want to introduce is one of the most important pieces of the model is the self-concept. Now your cognitive belief system is incorporating the entire long-term storage of your brain. Now your cognitive belief system is the total of all that is in our long-term storage areas, and it forms the basis of our view of the world around us. And that's an example of the picture at the top of the smiling face is your self-concept and how you see the yourself in that world. Now, cognitive belief systems, this information helps us to make sense out of the events that happen to us, The cognitive belief system helps us make sense to understand the laws of nature. The cognitive belief system helps us to recognize cause and effect. And your cognitive belief system of how the world works helps you to form decisions about goodness, truth, and beauty. So it's a key piece into learning and how we retain information for our success in the future. Now, David Sosa writes, because no two of us have the same data in our long-term storage, no two of us perceive the world in exactly the same way. And we are completely unique because of this fact. Now, not even identical twins raised in the same environment have identical data sets. And the data sets, again, reflect our self-concept and the cognitive belief system, how the world operates. We all have different perceptions. So here's an example of how people's experiences can cause them to interpret the same information differently. So I want you to close your eyes and form a mental image of the phrase take off. And as you think of take off, which of these pictures came into your mind? We have an airplane that's taking off the runway. We have a sign that says, please take off your shoes. We have a shirt that we're going to take off our body. Some people will take off a day of work. And other people will say, we're going to take off in our career, meaning that we are going to succeed and achieve. Well, the simple phrase of English, take off, can mean, just on this page, 5 different things. And based on our cognitive belief system, our view of the world around us and how that world works will imply which of these phrases fit, which of these images fit the word take off. And that's just one simple example of how we all perceive the world differently and have different examples. Now, the cognitive belief system is our view of the world around us and how that world works. And if you understand diversity, you will immediately understand that cognitive belief systems are different in our own country and from country to country, and of course world views change based on how the world works in their environment. Our self-concept is the way we view ourselves in that world. And there are zillions of ways to view yourselves in your own world. And some of us see ourselves low, some of us see ourselves as good in the world or bad in the world, or maybe neutral. But our self-concept is definitely affects our success and our achievement in our own world of how we see it. Now, the self-concept, I might conceptualize myself as a really, really poor math student. Or maybe I'm an average to above average athlete. Or maybe I perceive myself as an incredibly smart person in the world and always on honor roll. Well, these lists of how I describe myself make up my self-concept. How do you describe yourself? How do you see yourself in the world? If I asked you, how are you with mathematics? Are you a low, middle, or high self-concept with mathematics? That affects your choices from the moment you decided where you were on your self-concept based on your experiences with math. Are you the girl with her head against the wall, or are you a mathematician? And all of this is what I need to emphasize, and why we wrote the brain responsive approach is absolutely controllable in your brain. It's really the only thing you have control over in our world, is your ability to understand and control how you conceptualize yourself in this world and how you see yourself. So self-concept is critical, and it's a continuum that is able to change. Now, if I look at self-concept on this, it's at the top of the triangle for long-term storage. And at the very bottom, you see cognitive belief systems. It's critical for storing and remembering things. Now, our self-concept, some might see themselves as positive beings in the world, And some might not see themselves as positive and beings and approach the world in a negative way. And this is where we start with the brain responsive approach in the sense of we really need to stop and look at our own lives and understand our self concept and say to ourselves, I'm going to see myself in a more positive light in this world, and I'm going to learn how to do that. And it's my job, Mary Applegate, here your instructor, is to teach you about that. And I have found my mission and my purpose in the world. It's to help you understand how your brain works and how this key piece of self-concept moves you to positive or negative things in the world. Now, if I keep going with this idea, your self-concept and your past experiences, your old life might be, very, very positive, but your new life right now might be something negative. But we are definitely going to talk about how to move into a new life and have high experiences, successful experience based on your current self-concept. And your new life can move from a continuum of low to high based on specific steps. Now, your experience and your emotional states are directly connected to your success. And your experience and your emotional states are things that we can actually control. Now, I'm not talking about the random experiences of a car accident and someone runs into you, or you can't control those things, but your emotional states of how you manage those things after the experience happens is absolutely in our control. Now, this picture shows the amygdala. It's this almond-shaped piece in your brain. It's its own little character, its own little organ inside the brain, and it regulates your emotional states. Your amygdala will light up when you're not safe and make you aware of things. Your amygdala activates things that are emotional. Now, emotions, whether positive or negative, do these three things. They organize our experiences. They influence prediction of what's going to happen next, and they drive our behaviors. So, accepting or rejecting new learning is all based on your emotional response. If your emotional response is positive, then you're more likely to take that experience, influence it, and drive your behavior to change. If your emotional response is negative, you're probably not going to start to organize those experiences and move it into a change of behavior. You're going to avoid that. Now, accepting or rejecting new learning, I want you on this slide, it's blank. And I just would like you to stop and say to yourself, do I accept or reject new learning? And I want you to write down accept. You're going to change it if it's rejecting, and we're going to accept new learning. And I'm going to help you understand how that happens. Now, educators are in the only profession whose job is to change the human brain every day. If you are a strong educator and a positive light in the world, you are really helping them understand the emotional states that they're in and their self-concept in the world, and you are going to go straight to the center of the amygdala and the sensory register and make sure that things are meaningful. And we're going to help you with the brain responsive approach. Now, this slide is going to help people understand when they're learning how to move into activating a processing system that gives your attention, your working and processing speed, and your working memory, and moves it into a decision of higher level thinking and learning. And we are going to help you understand how to move through this chart and build a knowledge bank that can help change your opportunities in the future. So as I look at this, I input some attention, some working memory, and the content I will give you and help you understand processing speed. You're going to then move into the decision on which pieces you're going to work on. You're going to develop some logic and reasoning on why we want to do this. You're going to definitely attend the classes that I help you understand the visual processing, and your learned information will be stored in your knowledge bank, and as a result, you will be, of course, testing and spelling better if you need that, but you will be writing and drawing, speaking better at your position in the world, and you will be able to fill those filing cabinets with some content that you need to move on. Now, this is the personal and professional overview that I'd like to introduce that goes with our brain responsive course. Our modules are introduced on a 5-week schedule. Module 1 is what it is, the brain responsive approach, and what it is not, deficit remediation. Week 2, we go into the physiology of the brain, excuse me, the primary and secondary needs of your brain. We also will then, in week 3, move into what the model looks like for empowerment, motivation, and engagement. Model 4, week 4, excuse me, the information processing model will teach you about the 3 faculties of the mind and the 12 essential brain responsive elements that go into building a successful approach to learning. Module 5 teaches you about the brain responsive strategies for parenting, teaching, coaching, and leading. And then we have a bonus week, week 6, that will be a surprise for you with a whole bunch of extras. So with that being said, I would like to thank you for registering for this information processing model teaching. And remember always to teach to the brain, and the heart will follow. This is Mary Applegate. Thank you very much for attending. We're out.